The bullet traveled for 1.8 seconds before it found a man's temple. 600 meters away, Staff Sergeant Ramona Vashti watched through her scope as the enemy lieutenant dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Perfect shot, center mass of the skull. Her father would have been proud. Then the jungle erupted with gunfire and shouting, and Ramona understood exactly what she had just done. She had saved the convoy below from walking directly into the kill zone. She had also announced her position to the 20 fighters, now turning their weapons toward the ridge where her muzzle flash had betrayed her. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who has faced impossible odds and found a way through. Ramona was already moving before the first rounds snapped through the vegetation above her head. She rolled left, grabbed her rifle, and slithered backward through the undergrowth she had spent 3 hours crawling through to reach this position. The M2010 was heavy against her back, but she had carried it across 4 continents, and it had never failed her. She would not leave it behind now. The radio in her ear crackled with panicked voices. Captain Oduya was shouting for his team to find cover. Sergeant Crane was calling out enemy positions. Someone was screaming, the kind of scream that meant they would not be screaming much longer. Ramona forced herself to keep moving. She could not help them from up here. She could not help anyone if she was dead. 3 years she had been doing this. 3 years of lying in mud and rain and snow, waiting for the moment when her finger would squeeze and someone 600 meters away would stop breathing. The army called her Ghost because her targets never saw her coming. They never saw anything again. But ghosts were supposed to be invisible, and right now, 20 men with automatic weapons knew exactly where she had been. She reached the back slope of the ridge and allowed herself one breath. Just one. Below her, the ambush continued. The ODA team had been moving to investigate reports of illegal mining operations when the jungle had erupted around them. Ramona had been positioned on the ridge as overwatch, her job to provide precision fire support if things went wrong. Things had gone very wrong. Through gaps in the canopy, she could see the burning vehicles. 2 Humvees, both disabled in the first seconds of the attack. Bodies lay in the road, and she recognized some of them. Corporal Weston, who had shown her pictures of his newborn daughter just yesterday. Sergeant Holbrook, who always saved her a seat in the mess hall, even though snipers usually ate alone. Gone now. Gone because she had not seen the ambush coming. Gone because she had failed. The guilt would have to wait. Right now, she needed to survive. Ramona checked her ammunition. 47 rounds. Her sidearm held another 15. Against 20 fighters in jungle terrain where visibility rarely exceeded 30 meters, those numbers meant nothing. She could not shoot what she could not see, and these men knew how to use the green hell around them. She began moving down the slope, every step deliberate. Her father had taught her to walk in the woods when she was 6 years old, had made her practice until she could cross a room full of dry leaves without making a sound. Staff Sergeant Thomas Vashti had been the best sniper instructor Fort Benning ever produced, and he had poured everything he knew into his daughter. Move slow, he always said. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. Dead is what happens when you rush. The radio chatter had changed. Oduya was organizing the survivors, trying to break contact. At least some of them were still alive. Ramona felt something loosen in her chest at that realization. She had not gotten everyone killed. Not yet. A branch snapped somewhere below her, and she froze. Voices drifted up through the humid air, speaking a language she did not recognize. The fighters were spreading out, forming a search line. They were disciplined, she realized with growing unease. This was not some ragtag militia stumbling through the jungle. These men moved like professionals. She eased behind a massive tree trunk and controlled her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Her heart wanted to hammer against her ribs, but she would not let it. Panic was death. Calm was survival. She had learned that lesson in Syria 8 months ago, learned it while holding Denny's hand as the life drained out of him. Her spotter, her partner, her friend. He had died because she hesitated for half a second, and she had not worked with a spotter since. The voices grew closer. She could hear them moving through the brush 20 meters downslope. If they continued on their current path, they would pass within 5 meters of her position, close enough to smell her, close enough that even the slightest movement would give her away. Ramona pressed herself against the tree and became a statue. This was what she was best at, not the shooting, though she could put a round through a target at over 1,000 meters. Not the stalking, though she could move through any terrain without leaving a trace. What made her ghost was this: the ability to be still when everything inside her screamed to run. The patrol passed so close she could see the sweat stains on their fatigues. For men, AK variants, moving with the confidence of hunters who knew their prey was cornered. They did not look up. They did not see the woman pressed against the tree trunk above them, her finger resting on her trigger guard, ready to take at least 2 of them with her if they turned. They moved on. Ramona allowed herself to breathe. She waited another full minute before continuing her descent. The jungle swallowed her, green and wet and indifferent to the violence unfolding within it. Somewhere behind her, the sounds of the ambush were fading. Either the survivors had broken contact or there were no more survivors. Ramona refused to accept the second possibility. She would find them. She would get them out, and anyone who stood between her and her people would discover why the army called her ghost. She checked her rifle one more time, confirming a round was chambered. 47 bullets, 20 enemies, 8 kilometers of hostile jungle between her and the extraction point. The math was impossible. But then again, so was a 600-meter headshot through triple canopy jungle, and she had made that shot 15 minutes ago. Ramona moved deeper into the green darkness, and the hunt began. The jungle had a smell that Ramona had never encountered anywhere else on Earth. Rot and growth tangled together. Life feeding on death, feeding on life, in an endless cycle that did not care about the woman moving through its shadows. She had been in rainforests before, in South America and Southeast Asia, but this Central African green hell felt older somehow. More patient, like it had been waiting for something to die within it for a very long time. She moved parallel to the road, staying 50 meters inside the tree line. The ambush site was somewhere ahead, and she needed to see it. Needed to know who had survived and who had not. The radio had gone silent 10 minutes ago, either because the survivors were maintaining noise discipline or because there were no survivors left to maintain anything. Ramona refused to believe the second option. She had watched Captain Odia work for 3 weeks now, and the man was too stubborn to die in a jungle ambush. Sergeant Crane was an insufferable skeptic who had made it clear he did not trust female snipers, but he was also one of the most experienced operators in the unit. They were alive. They had to be. The first body she found was Corporal Weston. He lay face down in the undergrowth, 30 meters from the road. He had made it that far before the rounds caught him. Ramona knelt beside him and checked for a pulse even though she knew there would not be one. His skin was still warm. The picture of his daughter was still in his breast pocket. She knew because he had shown it to her just yesterday while they waited for the mission briefing. Little girl named Sophia. 7 pounds 4 ounces. He would never hold her now. Ramona closed his eyes and kept moving. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. The ambush site was worse than she had imagined. Both Humvees were burning, black smoke rising through the canopy. Bodies lay scattered across the road and into the jungle on both sides. She counted 6, then 7, then stopped counting because it hurt too much. These were her people. She had eaten with them, trained with them, laughed at their terrible jokes during long nights on base. Now, they were cooling meat in a jungle that would consume them within days. But there were only 7 bodies. The team had numbered 10 plus her. That meant at least 3 had escaped. Ramona studied the scene with the clinical detachment her father had drilled into her. The ambush had been professionally executed. Overlapping fields of fire, vehicle-killing weapons positioned at both ends of the kill zone, infantry sweeping in from multiple angles. This was not the work of local militia. Someone with real military training had planned this. Shell casings littered the ground. She picked one up and examined it. 7.62 by 39, standard Alaska ammunition. But the brass was clean, well-maintained. These fighters had discipline and resources. Something glinted in the mud near the lead Humvee. Ramona approached cautiously, scanning the tree line for any sign of the enemy. They had moved on, chasing the survivors or setting up a perimeter. Either way, she was alone for the moment. The glinting object was a radio, half buried in churned earth. She pulled it free and checked the battery. Dead. Useless. But next to it she found something better. Tracks. 3 sets of boot prints led away from the ambush site, heading northeast toward the high ground. One set was dragging, suggesting a wounded team member being supported by the others. They were moving slowly, leaving an obvious trail. Under normal circumstances, that would be a fatal mistake. But nothing about this day was normal. Ramona followed the tracks into the jungle. The enemy would be following too, she knew. A trail this obvious was an invitation. But she had no choice. Those boot prints belonged to her people, and she would not leave them behind. 50 meters into the undergrowth, she found the first sign that the survivors were fighting smart. The obvious trail ended at a stream, and the boot prints vanished into the water. Classique évasion technique. They had walked upstream or downstream to break their trail, then exited onto rocky ground that would not hold prints. Ramona allowed herself a small smile. Odia knew what he was doing. She studied the stream banks, looking for the subtle signs that would tell her which way they had gone. A bent branch here, a scuff mark on a rock there. Most people would miss these details, but Ramona had spent her entire adult life learning to see what others could not. The survivors had gone upstream, northeast, toward the ravine system that cut through this part of the jungle. Smart. The ravines would provide cover and limit the angles of approach. If they could reach a defensible position, they might be able to hold out until extraction. A branch cracked somewhere behind her. Ramona dropped into a crouch, rifle coming up to her shoulder in a motion so practiced it required no thought. The jungle had gone silent around her. No birds, no insects, no rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth. Something had disturbed them. She waited, breathing slow, heart steady, eyes scanning the green shadows for any sign of movement. There, 40 meters back, moving through a gap in the vegetation, a man in mismatched camouflage, AK held at the ready, following her trail. He was good, she noted, quiet, professional, but not good enough. Ramona watched him approach, calculating angles and distances. She could take him now, one shot through the chest, but the sound would bring others. She needed to know how many were behind him before she engaged. A second man appeared, then a third. A patrol spread out in a tactical formation. They were tracking her the same way she was tracking the survivors. Hunter and hunted, roles reversing with every step through this endless green maze. She could not fight 3 at once. Not at this range. Not without alerting every enemy fighter within a kilometer. Ramona eased backward, using the stream bank as cover. Her boots found the water without a splash, years of training guiding each movement. She moved upstream, staying low, letting the jungle swallow her. The patrol reached the spot where she had been standing. The lead man knelt, examining the ground. He looked up, scanning the tree line, and for one terrible moment his eyes seemed to meet hers across the distance. Then he turned and said something to his companions. They began moving downstream, away from her, following a false trail she had not even realized she was leaving. Ramona waited until they disappeared into the undergrowth before allowing herself to breathe. That had been close. Too close. These fighters were better than anyone she had faced outside of a military training exercise. She needed to find the survivors before the enemy did, and she needed to do it without leading the hunters directly to their prey. Ramona checked her ammunition again. Still 47 rounds. She had not fired since the opening shot that started this nightmare. That would change soon. She could feel it. The jungle waited around her, patient and hungry, as she moved deeper into its shadows. Somewhere ahead, her people were running for their lives. Somewhere behind, 20 fighters were closing the net. And caught in the middle was Ghost, alone with her rifle and her guilt and her absolute refusal to let anyone else die today. The stream led her through a narrow gorge where the jungle canopy closed overhead like a cathedral ceiling. Green light filtered down through layers of leaves, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. Ramona moved through this drowned world with the patience of a woman who understood that speed meant death. She had been tracking for 2 hours now. The survivors were still ahead of her, their trail growing fresher with each passing kilometer. They were slowing down, probably because of the wounded team member. That was both good and bad. Good because she was gaining on them. Bad because the enemy was gaining too. The gorge opened into a wider valley, and Ramona paused at the tree line to study the terrain ahead. A clearing stretched before her, maybe 60 meters across, dominated by the ruins of what had once been a mining camp. Rusted equipment lay scattered among the weeds. A collapsed structure that might have been a processing facility sagged against the hillside. The jungle was reclaiming everything, vines crawling over metal, trees pushing through concrete. Movement near the far tree line caught her eye. Ramona dropped to one knee and raised her scope. 2 men emerged from the jungle, rifles up, scanning the clearing. They moved with the same professional discipline she had observed at the ambush site. Behind them came 3 more, and behind those came a 6th man who moved differently from the others. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with a weathered face of someone who had spent decades in hard places. His left hand was missing 2 fingers. She noticed an old injury long since healed. He carried a Dragunov SVD with the casual familiarity of a man who had used it to end many lives. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Even at this distance, through her scope, she could see the cold intelligence in them. This was not a foot soldier. This was a commander. The tall man stopped in the center of the clearing and studied the ground. He knelt, touched something in the dirt, then rose and pointed toward the northeast, toward the ravines, toward the survivors. He knew. Somehow, he knew exactly where the Americans were heading. Ramona watched him issue orders to his men, quick gestures that sent them fanning out into the jungle. He was setting up a pursuit formation, she realized. Beaters to drive the prey and a kill line to finish them. Classic hunting technique, adapted for human targets. The tall man turned and looked directly at her position. Ramona froze. There was no way he could see her. She was concealed in deep shadow, 200 meters away, motionless. But those cold eyes seemed to find her anyway, seemed to look right through the vegetation and the distance and pin her in place like an insect on a board. Then he smiled. A small, knowing smile that made her blood run cold. He turned and walked into the jungle, following his men toward the northeast. Ramona stayed motionless for another 5 minutes, waiting for the trap she was certain he had set. But no one appeared. No shots rang out. The clearing remained empty except for the ghosts of whatever operation had once run here. She had just seen the man in charge, the one who had planned the ambush that killed 7 of her people. And he had looked at her like he knew exactly who she was and what she was doing. The game had changed. This was no longer just about survival. This was personal. Ramona circled wide around the clearing, adding 30 minutes to her pursuit, but avoiding any traps the enemy might have left behind. The jungle grew denser as she climbed toward the ridge line, the undergrowth so thick she had to push through it like swimming through green water. She found the first enemy fighter an hour later. He was young, maybe 20, positioned behind a fallen log with his rifle pointed down the slope. A sentry, watching for anyone following the main force. He was good at staying still, she had to admit. Most people would have walked right past him. Ramona was not most people. She studied him for 10 minutes, mapping his sight lines, noting his patterns. Every 40 seconds, he would scan left. Every 50 seconds, he would scan right. In between, his eyes stayed focused on the obvious approach route up the slope. She moved during his leftward scan, closing the distance to 15 meters. Then she waited through 2 more cycles, watching, confirming. On the 3rd cycle, when he turned right, she moved again. The knife went in below his ear, angling up into the brainstem. He died without a sound, without even a twitch. Ramona lowered him gently to the ground and cleaned her blade on his shirt. One down, 19 to go. She took his radio and listened to the chatter. The language was unfamiliar, Slavic maybe, but the tone was clear. They were coordinating, tightening the net around something ahead. The survivors. They had found the survivors. Ramona moved faster now, caution balanced against urgency. The terrain grew steeper, rockier, the jungle thinning as she climbed toward the ridge. She could hear voices ahead, shouted commands echoing off the stone walls of the ravine system. Another sentry appeared in her path. This one was older, more alert, positioned where he could see 3 different approaches at once. A professional. She could not get close enough to use her knife without being seen. Ramona settled into a firing position and controlled her breathing. The suppressor on her M2010 would muffle the shot, but it would not silence it completely. Anyone within 100 meters would know something had happened. She squeezed the trigger. The sentry dropped, a neat hole appearing in his forehead. 46 rounds remaining. Shouts erupted from somewhere ahead. They had heard. They were coming. Ramona moved laterally along the ridge, putting distance between herself and the body. She found a shallow depression beneath a rock overhang and pressed herself into it, becoming part of the stone and shadow. 3 fighters rushed past her position, heading for their fallen comrade. She could have taken all of them, but that would have meant 3 more shots, 3 more sounds to pinpoint her location. Instead, she waited, letting them pass, letting them find the body and raise the alarm. The radio in her pocket crackled with urgent voices. She did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Fear. Confusion. Someone was hunting the hunters. Good. Let them be afraid. Let them wonder where the next shot would come from. Ramona slipped out of her hiding spot and continued toward the ravines. The survivors were close now. She could feel it. And somewhere in the jungle behind her, the tall man with the cold eyes was still coming, still smiling that knowing smile. The hunt was far from over. The ravine walls rose around her like the bones of some ancient creature, gray stone slick with moisture and draped in hanging vines. Ramona moved along a narrow ledge, her back pressed against the rock, her rifle held close to her chest. Below her, a stream churned through boulders worn smooth by centuries of water. Above her, the jungle canopy formed a ragged ceiling that blocked most of the fading daylight. She had been moving for 6 hours now. Her legs burned. Her shoulders ached from the weight of her rifle and pack. But she did not stop, could not stop. The survivors were somewhere in this maze of stone and water, and the enemy was closing from every direction. The ledge ended at a small cave, barely large enough for 1 person to shelter in. Ramona checked it for threats, found none, and allowed herself 60 seconds of rest. She drank from her canteen, ate half a protein bar, and tried not to think about the man she had killed with her knife. But not thinking about death was impossible. It never had been, not since Syria. The memory came whether she wanted it or not. 8 months ago, a rooftop in a city whose name she had never learned to pronounce. Denny beside her, spotting for a shot, calling wind and distance in that calm Georgia drawl she had grown to love like a brother's voice. They had been tracking a high-value target for 3 days, a bomb maker responsible for dozens of American deaths. Ramona had him in her crosshairs, finger on the trigger, ready to end him. And then the world had exploded. The enemy had spotted their position. Counter-sniper fire raked the rooftop, and Denny took a round through the chest before either of them could react. Ramona remembered the sound he made, a wet gasp that she heard in her nightmares. She remembered dragging him toward cover while bullets sparked off the concrete around them. She remembered his hand gripping hers, weaker with every passing second. Hold on, she had told him. Just hold on, Denny. Help is coming. But help had not come fast enough. Corporal Denny Henshaw, 26 years old, from a small town outside Savannah, had died on that rooftop with his hand in hers. His last words had been an apology. Sorry, Ghost. Thought I saw him, but I was wrong. He had been apologizing for missing the counter-sniper, for a mistake that had cost him his life. And Ramona had never forgiven herself for not seeing the threat first. She was supposed to be the best. She was supposed to see everything. She had not taken another spotter since. Command allowed it, because her results remained perfect, but she knew the real reason she worked alone. She could not bear to be responsible for another partner's death. A sound from below snapped her back to the present. Voices speaking that unfamiliar Slavic language. Ramona pressed deeper into the shadows of the cave and watched the stream bed through a gap in the rocks. For fighters moved along the water's edge, following the same path the survivors must have taken. They were 50 meters below her, too far for a knife and too close together for a clean rifle shot. If she fired, the stone walls would echo the sound until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. They would not know where she was, but the tall man would know. Somehow, she was certain he would know. Ramona let them pass. She counted to 100 after they disappeared around a bend, then resumed her movement along the ledge. The ravine system branched ahead, 3 separate passages leading in different directions. The survivors could have taken any of them. Ramona knelt at the junction and searched for signs. A scuff on a rock, a broken twig, a drop of blood that had not yet been washed away by the mist. There, the middle passage, a handprint on the stone wall, smeared but visible. Someone had steadied themselves here, someone with blood on their palm. The wounded team member. Ramona followed the middle passage deeper into the ravine system. The walls grew closer, the light dimmer, the air thick with moisture and the smell of rotting vegetation. She felt like she was descending into the earth itself, leaving behind the world of sun and sky for something older and darker. The passage opened suddenly into a wider chamber, a natural amphitheater carved by millennia of flowing water. Ramona stopped at the entrance and raised her rifle, scanning for threats. What she found instead was hope. A defensive position had been established at the far end of the chamber. Rocks piled into a rough barricade, weapons pointed at the only entrance. And behind those weapons, faces she recognized. Captain Oduya saw her first. His rifle tracked toward her, then stopped as recognition flickered in his eyes. He did not lower his weapon, and she respected him for that. In this jungle, trust was earned in blood. "Ghost," he said, her call sign, spoken like a prayer. "Captain," she replied. She kept her voice steady, professional, even as relief flooded through her. "I thought you were dead. We thought the same about you." He finally lowered his rifle and gestured for her to approach. "How many behind you?" "At least 17, she said. "Maybe more. I took out 3 on the way here." She reached the barricade and saw the full scope of the situation. Oduya was wounded, a bloody bandage wrapped around his left arm. Sergeant Crane crouched behind the rocks, his face pale, but his eyes still sharp. A young soldier she did not recognize lay motionless against the wall, and for a moment she thought he was dead. Then she saw his chest rise and fall. "Private First Class Escara," Oduya said, following her gaze. "Communications specialist. Took a round through the leg during the ambush. She cannot walk." Ramona looked at the wounded woman, then at the 2 men who had carried her this far. Then she looked at the single entrance to this chamber, the choke point that was both their greatest defense and their most dangerous trap. "Extraction point is 8 kilometers northeast," she said. "Helicopter window opens at dawn tomorrow. 18 hours from now." Crane let out a bitter laugh. 18 hours. With a woman who cannot walk and 17 hostiles between us and the LZ. Might as well be 18 years. Ramona met his eyes. She saw the doubt there, the skepticism he had never bothered to hide. He did not believe she could save them. He barely believed she should be here at all. 17 hostiles, she said quietly. 46 rounds. That is almost 3 bullets per fighter. I have worked with worse odds. She turned away from his doubt and began studying the chamber, looking for secondary exits, defensive improvements, anything that might help them survive the night. Behind her, Oduya placed a hand on Crane's shoulder. "Let her work," he said. Ghost did not earn that name by accident. The chamber felt smaller with every passing minute. Outside, somewhere in the darkening jungle, 20 hunters -3 were closing the net. And the man with the cold eyes was still out there, still coming, still smiling that terrible smile. Ramona found a secondary exit an hour before darkness fell completely. A narrow fissure in the back wall of the chamber, hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. She followed it for 30 meters and emerged on a ledge overlooking the jungle canopy. The view stretched for kilometers in every direction, and she could see the distant gleam of water that marked their extraction point. 8 kilometers. It might as well have been 800 with Askara unable to walk. She returned to the chamber and reported her findings to Oduya. The captain listened in silence, his wounded arm held close to his chest. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "We move at first light," he said. "Use the darkness to rest, conserve strength. They will not attack a fortified position at night." Ramona was not so sure about that. The men hunting them were not ordinary fighters. But she kept her doubts to herself and took up a position near the entrance, her rifle trained on the passage beyond. The night came slowly to the ravine, darkness seeping down the stone walls like black water. Ramona watched the shadows deepen and listened to the sounds of the jungle settling into its nocturnal rhythms. Insects began their chorus. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out a warning that went unanswered. Behind her, Crane moved to check on Askara. The young woman was conscious now, her face tight with pain, but her eyes clear and alert. Ramona could hear them talking in low voices, Crane asking about her wound, Askara insisting she was fine. She was not fine. Ramona had seen the injury when she arrived. The bullet had passed through the meat of Askara's thigh, missing the bone but tearing muscle and blood vessels. Without proper medical care, infection would set in within days. They needed to reach that extraction point, and they needed to do it fast. The radio she had taken from the dead sentry crackled to life. Ramona pulled it from her pocket and listened to the voices speaking in that Slavic language. She could not understand the words, but she recognized the cadence of tactical communication. They were coordinating moving assets into position. Then a new voice came through, deeper and calmer than the others. It spoke in English. "I know you're listening, American." The accent was thick, but the words were clear. "I know you found your friends. I know you think you are safe in that stone hole." Ramona's blood went cold. He was talking to her. The tall man with the cold eyes was talking directly to her. "My name is Christoph Lazarevic. Perhaps you have heard of me. Perhaps not. It does not matter. What matters is that I have heard of you. Ghost, they call you. The invisible sniper who never misses." He laughed, a sound like gravel shifting. "I have killed ghosts before." Oduya moved to her side, his face grim in the darkness. Ramona held up a hand, signaling for silence. "You killed 3 of my men today," Lazarevic continued. "Good men, professionals. I trained some of them myself. For that, I will make your death slow. But first I will make you watch your friends die, one by one, and you will know that you could have saved them if you had only been faster, better, less arrogant." The radio went silent. Ramona stared at it for a long moment, then shoved it back in her pocket. "Who is that?" Oduya asked. "The man in charge," she replied. "Former Serbian Special Forces, if I had to guess. He planned the ambush. He is running the hunt. And he knows we are here." "Yes." She turned to face the captain. "He's trying to get in my head. Make me doubt myself. Make me make mistakes. Is it working?" Ramona thought about the question. Thought about Denny dying on that rooftop. Thought about the guilt she had carried for 8 months. Thought about the 20 fighters, now 17, who stood between them and survival. "No," she said finally. "It is not working." But even as she said the words, she felt the cold seed of doubt taking root in her chest. Lazarevic knew her call sign. He knew her reputation. He had planned an ambush that killed 7 American soldiers and nearly killed 3 more. This was not some jungle warlord playing at war. This was a professional, a predator, and he was hunting her specifically. The night stretched on. Ramona kept watch while the others rested, her eyes never leaving the entrance passage. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound seemed to carry a threat. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to maintain the calm that had kept her alive through a dozen deployments. Around midnight, Askara crawled to her position. The young woman moved awkwardly, dragging her wounded leg, but her eyes were determined. "You do not have to be here," Ramona said quietly. "Save your strength." "I'm not here for my strength." Escara settled against the rock wall beside her. "I am here because I wanted to say thank you." Ramona glanced at her. "For what?" "For coming for us." Escara's voice was barely above a whisper. "When the ambush hit, I thought we were all going to die. Then I heard that shot, the one that took down their lieutenant, and I knew someone was still fighting. I did not know it was you until now, but I knew someone had not given up on us." Ramona did not know how to respond. She was not good with gratitude. She was good at shooting, at hiding, at waiting in the darkness for the moment to kill. But human connection had always been harder for her than any long-distance shot. "Get some rest," she said finally. "Tomorrow will be hard." Escara nodded, but did not move. Instead, she asked, "Why do they call you Ghost?" "Because I disappear," Ramona replied. "And when I reappear, people die." Escara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is terrifying." "Yes." Ramona allowed herself a small smile. "That is rather the point." They sat together in the darkness, sniper and communications specialist, two women from very different worlds united by circumstance and survival. Outside, the jungle continued its endless symphony of life and death. And somewhere in that darkness, Christoph Lazarevic was waiting for dawn. When the first gray light began to seep into the ravine, Ramona woke the others. They had 18 hours of darkness behind them and 8 kilometers of hostile jungle ahead. The impossible march was about to begin. The fissure was tighter than Ramona remembered. She went first, squeezing through the narrow gap with her rifle held ahead of her, stones scraping against her shoulders and back. Behind her came Odia, then Crane carrying Escara in a fireman's hold, the young woman biting down on a strip of cloth to keep from crying out as her wounded leg scraped against the rock. They emerged onto the ledge just as the sun broke over the eastern horizon. Golden light spilled across the jungle canopy, painting everything in shades of amber and green. It would have been beautiful under other circumstances. Right now, it just meant they could be seen. Ramona scanned the terrain below with her scope. The jungle stretched out like a rumpled green blanket, broken by the silver threads of streams and the gray scars of exposed rock. She traced a path through the vegetation, identifying cover points and danger zones, mapping the route they would take. "There," she said, pointing toward a ridge line 2 kilometers distant. "We follow the high ground as long as possible. Fewer sight lines from below, harder for them to flank us." "And when the high ground runs out?" Crane asked. His voice was flat, skeptical, but she noticed he was no longer questioning her right to lead. "Then we go through the valley. Fast and quiet." She looked at Escara, who met her gaze without flinching. "Can you stay silent, no matter how much it hurts?" "I can stay silent," Escara replied. "Just get me to that helicopter." They began the descent. Ramona led, picking a path through the rocks and vegetation that minimized exposure. Odia followed 10 meters behind, his wounded arm limiting his ability to use his rifle, but his eyes still sharp. Crane brought up the rear with Escara on his back, moving with a strength that surprised her. The man was built like a draft horse and apparently just as tireless. The first hour passed without incident. They covered nearly a kilometer, making better time than Ramona had expected. The jungle was quiet around them, almost peaceful, and she found herself hoping that maybe Lazarevic had lost their trail. That hope died when she heard the gunshot. "Everyone down," she hissed, dropping behind a fallen tree. The others followed suit, Crane lowering Escara as gently as he could manage. The shot had come from somewhere to their left, maybe 300 meters away. A single report, not aimed at them. A signal, perhaps, or a warning. Then the radio in her pocket crackled to life. "Good morning, Ghost." Lazarevic's voice was almost cheerful. "I trust you slept well. My men have been busy while you rested. We found your back door. Clever, using the fissure, but not clever enough." Ramona pulled out the radio and thumbed the transmit button. "If you knew where we were, why did you not attack in the night?" Lazarevic laughed. "Because that would have been too easy. I want you to run, Ghost. I want you to struggle and fight, and believe you might actually escape. And then, when you're exhausted and desperate and out of ammunition, I want to look into your eyes and watch the hope drain out of them. That is worth more to me than a quick kill in the darkness. The radio went silent. Ramona stared at it for a long moment, then looked at the others. They had heard everything. He is insane, Crane muttered. No. Ramona shook her head. He is patient. There is a difference. He is playing with us because he believes he has already won. That is his weakness. Oduya moved to her side. What do you suggest? We give him what he wants. We run. She pointed toward the ridgeline. But while we run, we thin his numbers. Every fighter I can take down is one less between us and extraction. He thinks he is hunting us. He is wrong. We are hunting each other. They resumed their movement, faster now. Ramona pushed ahead, opening the gap between herself and the others. If Lazarevic wanted to hunt her, she would give him a hunt, but she would be the one choosing the ground. She found her first opportunity 20 minutes later. A patrol of 3 fighters moving parallel to their route, tracking through the jungle 200 meters downslope. They were good, maintaining spacing and noise discipline, but they did not know she was watching. Ramona settled into a firing position behind a boulder. She controlled her breathing, felt her heart slow, watched through her scope as the lead fighter stepped into a gap between 2 trees. The shot took him through the chest. He dropped without a sound. His companions reacted instantly, diving for cover, but Ramona had already shifted her aim. The second shot caught the next man as he rolled behind a log, punching through the wood and into his body. The third fighter was smarter, finding solid cover before she could line up another shot. She did not wait for him to recover. By the time he raised his head to look for her, she was already moving, rejoining the others at a dead run. For down, she reported as she reached them. 44 rounds remaining. Keep moving. They pushed on. The jungle seemed to close around them, branches grabbing at their clothes, roots reaching for their feet. Ramona could feel the enemy presence now, a pressure at the edges of her awareness. Lazarevic was tightening the net, driving them toward something. The ridge line ended abruptly at a cliff overlooking the valley below. Ramona stood at the edge and looked down at 60 meters of sheer rock face. There was no way down, not with a wounded woman who could not walk. She turned to study their options. The cliff curved away to the north and south, too far to circumvent without losing hours they did not have. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were growing closer. They were trapped. Then Escara spoke up. There. She pointed toward a dark opening in the rock face, partially hidden by vegetation. A cave. Ramona moved to investigate. The cave mouth was narrow but passable, and the darkness beyond suggested depth. It might lead nowhere, or it might lead through the ridge to the valley on the other side. Either way, it was their only option. Into the cave, she ordered. Now, one by one, they disappeared into the darkness. Behind them, the jungle erupted with shouted commands and crashing vegetation. Lazarevic had found them. The race was on. The cave swallowed them whole. Darkness so complete that Ramona could not see her hand in front of her face closed around them like a fist. She pulled a small flashlight from her vest and clicked it on, the narrow beam cutting through the black. The passage stretched ahead, twisting deeper into the rock. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air smelled of ancient stone and things long dead. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, a steady rhythm that echoed off surfaces she could not see. Single file, she whispered, hands on the shoulder of the person ahead. I lead. They formed a chain in the darkness. Ramona first, then Oduya, then Crane still carrying Escara. The young woman had gone pale, her face sheened with sweat, but she made no sound as they moved into the unknown. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded. The enemy would follow, Ramona knew, but they would be cautious. Caves are natural kill zones, perfect for ambushes. Lazarevic would send scouts first, probing the darkness before committing his main force. That bought them time. Not much, but maybe enough. The passage narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again. Ramona moved by feel as much as sight, testing each step before committing her weight. The rock was treacherous, crumbling in places, slick in others. One wrong step could mean a broken ankle or worse. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Ramona swept her light across the space and felt her heart sink. 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. No way to tell which, if any, led through to the other side of the ridge. "We need to split up," Crane said. "Cover more ground." "No." Ramona shook her head. "We stay together. If one of us finds the way out while the others are lost in here, we all die." "Then how do we choose?" Oduya asked. Ramona studied the 3 openings. They looked identical in the flashlight beam, dark mouths leading into darker throats. She closed her eyes and focused on her other senses. Air. There had to be air moving if one of these tunnels connected to the outside. She felt it then. The faintest whisper of a breeze against her cheek, coming from the leftmost passage. "This one," she said. She did not explain how she knew. There was no time for explanations. They entered the left passage and continued their descent into the earth. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. Ramona tried not to think about what would happen if the passage deadened. They would have to backtrack, losing precious time, and the enemy would be waiting. Crane's voice broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Ramona did not slow her pace. "For what?" "For doubting you." He shifted Escara's weight on his back. "When they assigned a female sniper to our team, I thought it was politics. Checking boxes. I did not think you belonged in the field with us. And now I have watched you kill 5 men in a single day, navigate a jungle full of hostiles, and lead us through a cave system that would have most soldiers panicking." He paused. "I was wrong. You belong here more than most of the operators I have worked with." Ramona considered his words. The apology was unexpected, and she was not sure how to receive it. She had spent years proving herself to men like Crane, men who saw her gender before they saw her skills. Most of them never admitted they were wrong. "I do not need your approval," she said finally, "but I appreciate you saying it." Behind her, Escara let out a weak laugh. "That is the closest Ghost gets to saying thank you. I have learned that much today." The passage leveled out and began to climb. Ramona felt the air moving more strongly now, a definite current flowing past her face. They were close to something. An exit, she hoped. Not another trap. The tunnel curved sharply to the right, and suddenly the darkness was not complete anymore. Gray light filtered in from somewhere ahead, pale and diffuse, but unmistakably daylight. Ramona clicked off her flashlight and let her eyes adjust. The passage ended at a narrow crack in the rock, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Beyond it, she could see jungle. They had made it through. She approached the opening carefully, checking for threats before exposing herself. The crack emerged onto a steep hillside overlooking the valley they needed to cross. The extraction point was visible in the distance, a clearing near a river bend, maybe 5 kilometers away. 5 kilometers. They could make it. They had to make it. "Wait here," she told the others. "I'm going to check our route." She slipped through the crack and moved along the hillside, staying low, using the vegetation for cover. The jungle was quiet around her, no signs of the enemy. Perhaps Lazarevic's men were still searching the caves, following the wrong tunnels into dead ends. Then she saw them. A line of fighters stretched across the valley below, maybe a dozen men spread at 100-meter intervals. They were not searching. They were waiting. Lazarevic had anticipated their route and positioned his forces to intercept. Ramona counted the men carefully. 12. That meant there was still more somewhere behind them, probably in the caves or guarding the flanks. They were surrounded, caught between the hammer of pursuit and the anvil of ambush. She returned to the others and reported what she had seen. Oduya listened with his jaw tight. Crane cursed under his breath. Escara just closed her eyes. "So we fight through them," Crane said. "What choice do we have?" Ramona looked at Escara, at her pale face and her useless leg. They could not move fast enough to evade, could not maneuver effectively with a wounded team member. A direct assault would get them all killed. "No," she said. "We do not fight through." "I do." She checked her rifle. Confirmed a round was chambered. 44 bullets. 12 men in the valley, plus however many were behind them. The math was still impossible, but the impossible was what she did best. "I'm going to draw them off," she continued. "Create chaos, thin their numbers. You three move along the ridge until you find a gap, then push for the extraction point." "That is suicide," Oduya said. Ramona met his eyes. "Maybe, but it is Eskara's only chance." I did not come this far to watch another partner die. She did not wait for them to argue. She slipped through the crack and disappeared into the jungle, leaving the others behind. Ghost was going hunting. Ramona moved through the jungle like smoke through a burning building. She stayed low, used every scrap of cover, made no sound that did not belong to the forest around her. This was what she was born to do. This was what her father had trained her for since she was old enough to hold a rifle. The jungle was not her enemy. It was her weapon. She circled wide to the east, putting distance between herself and the others. The line of fighters in the valley had not moved, still holding their positions like beads on a string. Lazarevic was confident. He believed he had them trapped. He believed there was no escape. He was about to learn otherwise. Ramona found her first position on a small rise overlooking the eastern end of the enemy line. 3 fighters clustered together near a stream, too close for proper tactical spacing. Lazy, overconfident, they did not expect the prey to become the predator. She settled into her shooting stance, rifle braced against a tree root, breathing slow and even. The suppressor would muffle the shot, but sound traveled strangely in the valley. She needed to be quick, precise, and moving before they could triangulate her position. The first shot took the leftmost man through the throat. He dropped without a sound, dead before he hit the ground. The second shot followed half a heartbeat later, catching the middle man as he turned toward his fallen comrade. The third man had time to raise his weapon, time to open his mouth and shout a warning, before Ramona's third round punched through his chest and silenced him forever. 3 shots, 3 kills, 41 rounds remaining. She was already moving before the echoes faded, slipping down the back of the rise and circling north. Behind her, she could hear shouts of alarm spreading through the enemy line. They knew they were under attack now. They just did not know from where. The radio in her pocket crackled. "Impressive, Ghost." Lazarevic's voice was calm, almost admiring. 3 of my men in as many seconds. You are everything they said you were." Ramona did not respond. She kept moving, putting distance between herself and her last position. "But you have made a mistake," Lazarevic continued. "You have separated yourself from your friends. Now, they have no one to protect them." Ramona's blood went cold. She pulled out the radio and keyed the transmit button. "If you touch them, I will not just kill you. I will make it last." Lazarevic laughed. "There she is, the real Ghost. Not the cold professional, but the woman underneath. You care about them. That is your weakness." The radio went silent. Ramona forced herself to keep moving, to trust that Oduya and Crane would keep Eskar safe. She had given them an opening. Now, she needed to make it wider. She found her next position on a rocky outcrop, overlooking the center of the enemy line. For fighters were moving toward the east, responding to the sound of her earlier shots. They were bunched together, rushing, not thinking. Perfect targets. For more shots. For more bodies. 37 rounds remaining. The enemy line was collapsing, fighters abandoning their positions to pursue her or to seek cover. Ramona watched through her scope as chaos spread through their ranks. This was what she wanted. Confusion. Fear. The certainty that death could come from anywhere at any moment. She moved again, heading west this time. The sun was climbing toward noon, burning away the morning mist and turning the jungle into a steam bath. Sweat poured down her face, soaked through her uniform, made her grip on the rifle slippery. She ignored all. Discomfort was temporary. Death was permanent. A burst of automatic fire tore through the vegetation to her left. Someone had spotted her, or thought they had. Ramona dropped flat and crawled through the undergrowth, moving perpendicular to the line of fire. More shots followed, wild and unfocused, spraying the jungle without purpose. They were panicking. Good. She emerged from the brush behind a large boulder and found herself face to face with an enemy fighter. He was young, barely out of his teens, and his eyes went wide with shock as he saw her. His rifle was pointed at the ground. Hers was not. She shot him through the heart before he could raise his weapon. 36 rounds. More shouts. More gunfire. The enemy was shooting at shadows now, at every rustle of leaves and snap of branches. Ramona used the noise to cover her movement, slipping through the chaos like a ghost through walls. The radio crackled again. "You're a very good ghost." Lazarevic sounded less calm now, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "But you cannot kill all of them. And while you play your games, my men are closing on your friends." Ramona stopped. She raised her scope and scanned the hillside where she had left the others. For a long moment she saw nothing. Then movement caught her eye. 3 figures moving along the ridge, heading north toward a gap in the enemy line. Oduya, Crane, and Escara. They were making their break. But they were not alone, for fighters were climbing the hillside behind them, moving fast, closing the distance. They would catch the others in minutes, and there was nothing Ramona could do to stop them. The range was too far, the angle too steep. She could not make the shot. Then she saw Crane stop and turn. He lowered Escara to the ground and raised his rifle. Oduya tried to pull him back, but Crane shrugged off his hand and took a firing position behind a fallen tree. "No," Ramona whispered. "Keep moving. Do not stop." But Crane was not listening. He opened fire on the pursuing fighters, his shots echoing across the valley. One of the pursuers fell. The others dove for cover and returned fire. Crane was giving the others time. He was sacrificing himself so Oduya could carry Escara to safety. Ramona watched Oduya grab Escara and resume his climb, his wounded arm forgotten. She watched Crane hold his position, trading fire with 3 enemies who were already flanking him. She watched a round catch him in the shoulder, spinning him around, and still he kept shooting. She could not reach him, could not save him, could only watch as the man who had doubted her proved his courage in the worst possible way. Then Crane went down, and he did not get back up. Ramona screamed. The sound tore from her throat before she could stop it, a raw cry of rage and grief that echoed off the valley walls. Denny, now Crane. How many more would die because she was not fast enough, not good enough, not enough? The radio crackled one last time. "Now you understand," Lazarevic said softly. "Now you know what it feels like to watch your friends die and be unable to stop it." Ramona stared at the hillside where Crane had fallen. Then she looked at the radio in her hand. "I am coming for you," she said. "And when I find you, you will beg me to stop." She threw the radio into the jungle and disappeared into the trees. The hunt had become personal. Ramona moved through the jungle with a cold fury that burned away her exhaustion. Crane was dead. The man who had doubted her, who had apologized, who had carried Escara on his back for kilometers through hostile terrain. Dead because he chose to stand and fight instead of run. Dead because she had not been there to protect him. She would mourn him later. Right now, she had work to do. The enemy line had disintegrated. Fighters were scattered across the valley, some searching for her, others regrouping near the western ridge. She counted 5 remaining plus Lazarevic, assuming he was still out there somewhere. The Serbian had not shown himself during the firefight. He was waiting, watching, letting his men die while he conserved his strength for the final confrontation. Ramona checked her rifle. 36 rounds. More than enough. She angled toward the hillside where Oduya and Escara had disappeared. The gap in the enemy line was still open, a corridor of unguarded jungle leading toward the extraction point. If she could reach them, if she could get them to the river before Lazarevic closed the trap, they might still survive this. A branch snapped somewhere to her right. Ramona dropped into a crouch, rifle coming up. She scanned the vegetation, looking for movement, listening for any sound that did not belong. The jungle had gone quiet around her. Too quiet. Even the insects had stopped their endless chorus. Someone was close. She eased backward, putting a thick tree trunk between herself and the direction of the sound. Her breathing was slow and controlled, her heart steady. Fear was a luxury she could not afford. Another sound, closer now. Footsteps in the undergrowth, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. Ramona tracked the noise, calculating distance and direction. 20 meters, maybe less, coming from the northeast, moving slowly. She waited. Patience was her greatest weapon, more reliable than any rifle. The person approaching would reveal themselves eventually. They always did. A figure emerged from the brush. Male, medium build, carrying an AK variant. He was scanning the jungle ahead, not behind. He did not see Ramona pressed against the tree trunk 5 meters to his left. She let him pass. Then she moved. The knife took him in the kidney, angling upward. She clamped her other hand over his mouth, muffling his scream as she lowered him to the ground. His eyes found hers in those final seconds, wide with shock and pain. Then the light went out of them, and he was gone. 5 enemies remaining. Plus d'Azalvik. Ramona cleaned her blade and kept moving. The hillside was close now, the slope rising sharply through the trees. She could see the gap where Oduya and Hiskara had passed, a natural corridor between 2 rocky outcrops. If she could reach that gap, she could catch up with them before they hit the extraction point. A shot rang out. The round passed so close to her head that she felt the wind of its passage. Ramona threw herself sideways, rolling behind a fallen log as a second shot tore a chunk of bark from the spot where she had been standing. Sniper. Lazarevic. She pressed herself flat against the ground, making herself as small a target as possible. The shots had come from somewhere above, the western ridge overlooking the valley. She could not see the shooter, but she knew he could see her. One wrong move, and she was dead. Very good, Ghost. Lazarevic's voice drifted down from the ridge, calm and conversational. You almost made it. Another 50 meters, and you would have been in dead ground. But almost is not enough. Ramona did not respond. She was calculating angles, distances, cover options. The log she was behind would stop small arms fire, but a Dragunov round would punch right through it. She needed to move. I watched you kill my men, Lazarevic continued. Impressive work. Clinical. Efficient. You would have made an excellent Serbian soldier. Another shot, this one striking the log inches from her head. Splinters rained down on her face. He was toying with her, she realized. He could have killed her with the first shot if he wanted to. He was enjoying this. But now it is just you and me, he said. Sniper against sniper. Ghost against butcher. Let us see which legend is true. Ramona spotted her opportunity. A shallow depression in the ground, maybe 10 meters to her left. If she could reach it, she would be below his angle of fire. From there, she could work her way around the ridge and come at him from a direction he did not expect. She gathered herself. 1 breath. 2. Then she moved. The first shot came as she left the cover of the log. It missed by centimeters, kicking up dirt at her heels. The second came as she dove for the depression. This one was closer, grazing her arm and leaving a line of fire across her bicep. She hit the ground hard, rolling into the shallow dip, and pressed herself against the earth. Blood soaked through her sleeve. The wound was superficial, she told herself. Painful, but not debilitating. She could still shoot. She could still fight. From somewhere on the ridge, Lazarevic laughed. First blood to me, Ghost. How does it feel? Ramona checked her rifle. Still functional. She looked at the blood seeping through her fingers and felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not anger. Something colder, something sharper. She had been fighting this battle on his terms, reacting to his moves, letting him dictate the pace and the ground. That ended now. She began to move, staying low, using every fold in the terrain to shield herself from his sight line. The ridge was maybe 400 meters away, a long distance to cover under the eye of a trained sniper. But she had done harder things. The jungle closed around her as she circled wide to the north. Behind her, the extraction point waited. Ahead, Lazarevic waited. And somewhere between them, Oduya and Hiskara were still running for their lives. The sun was past its peak now, afternoon shadows beginning to lengthen. The helicopter window would open in less than 4 hours. She needed to end this before then. She needed to kill the butcher. Ramona checked her ammunition one last time. 36 rounds. 1 target. and a rage that burned cold and bright in her chest. She began to climb. The ridge was steeper than it looked from below. Ramona climbed with her rifle slung across her back, using roots and rocks for handholds, ignoring the fire in her wounded arm. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage she had wrapped around the graze, but the bleeding was slowing. She would survive. She had to survive. Lazarevic would be expecting her to circle around, to approach from an unexpected angle. That was standard counter-sniper doctrine. Find the enemy's blind spot and exploit it. But Ramona was not going to do what he expected. She was going to do something stupid. She was going to come straight at him. The climb took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of exposed movement on a hillside where a single mistake meant death. Lazarevic did not fire. Either he had lost sight of her or he was waiting for a better shot. She suspected the latter. Men like him did not miss opportunities. They created them. She reached a narrow ledge just below the ridgeline and paused to catch her breath. Her arm throbbed with every heartbeat. Her legs burned from the climb. But her hands were steady and her mind was clear. That was all that mattered. Ramona unslung her rifle and checked the chamber. 1 round ready. 35 more in reserve. She would only need 1 if she did this right. She eased up to the ridgeline and peered over the edge. The western ridge was a narrow spine of rock covered in sparse vegetation. She could see maybe 200 meters in either direction before the terrain curved away. Lazarevic was somewhere on this ridge, hidden, watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. She was not going to make a mistake. Ramona studied the terrain with the patience her father had drilled into her. Every rock, every shadow, every patch of vegetation. A sniper's hide could be anywhere. The trick was seeing what did not belong. A shape too regular. A color too uniform. A shadow that fell wrong. There, 60 meters to the south. A cluster of boulders with a gap between them that was just slightly too dark. A natural blind spot that would give a shooter a clear view of the approach routes while remaining invisible from below. Ramona settled into her own position, using a fallen tree as cover. She brought her rifle up and sighted through the scope. The gap between the boulders filled her vision. She could see nothing inside it, just darkness. But she knew he was there. She could feel him watching her. 2 snipers, hidden from each other, each waiting for the other to move. This was the game they played. Patience against patience. Nerve against nerve. Whoever broke first died. I know you were there, Ghost. Lazarevic's voice drifted across the ridge, calm and confident. I can smell your blood. Ramona did not respond. She kept her eye pressed to her scope, her finger resting on the trigger guard. Not yet. Not until she had a shot. You remind me of someone, he continued. A woman I knew in Serbia before the war. She was a hunter too. Patient. Deadly. Beautiful in her way. The voice was coming from the boulders. He was trying to distract her, to make her focus on his words instead of her aim. She would not fall for it. She died badly, Lazarevic said. They all do eventually. The ones like us. We are not meant for peaceful ends. A flicker of movement in the darkness between the boulders. Just a shadow, a hint of shape. But it was enough. Ramona shifted her aim a fraction of a degree. She exhaled slowly, letting her body settle into perfect stillness. The world narrowed to the space between her eye and her target. Nothing else existed. Nothing else mattered. She squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the ridge like thunder. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a figure slumped forward from between the boulders, tumbling down the rocky slope and coming to rest in a patch of scrub. Ramona did not move. She kept her scope trained on the body, watching for any sign of life. Lazarevic could be faking, could be waiting for her to expose herself. She had seen that trick before, but the body did not move. The chest did not rise and fall. After a full minute of observation, Ramona allowed herself to believe. The butcher was dead. She climbed down from her position and approached the body carefully, rifle still raised. Lazarevic lay face down in the dirt, a neat hole in the side of his head where a round had entered. His Dragunov lay beside him, unfired. He had never gotten a shot he was waiting for. Ramona stood over him and felt nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just a hollow emptiness where her rage had been. Crane was still dead. Denny was still dead. 7 soldiers from her unit were still dead. Killing this man did not bring any of them back, but it meant he would never hurt anyone else. She took his radio and keyed the transmit button. "Your commander is dead," she said in a flat voice. "Lazarevic is gone. Any of you who want to live should start running now." She dropped the radio beside his body and turned away. The extraction point was still 3 kilometers distant. Odia and Escara were somewhere between here and there, hopefully still moving, hopefully still alive. Ramona needed to find them, needed to get them on that helicopter. She had 34 rounds remaining, 5 enemies still unaccounted for, and less than 3 hours until the extraction window opened. Ramona began to descend the ridge, leaving the butcher behind. The jungle waited below, green and indifferent, the same as it had always been. But she was not the same. Something had changed in her during this long, bloody day. Something had broken, and something new had grown in its place. She did not know what it was yet. She did not know if it was good or bad. She only knew that she was still alive, and she intended to stay that way. The jungle felt different now, quieter. The birds had returned to their songs, and the insects had resumed their endless chorus. The weight of Lazarevic's presence had lifted from the valley, and everything that lived here seemed to sense it. Ramona moved quickly down the ridge, following the path Odia and Escara should have taken. Her wounded arm had stiffened during the climb, but she forced it to work. Pain was just information. It told her she was still alive. She found their trail within 20 minutes. Boot prints in the soft earth, broken branches, the unmistakable signs of people moving fast through dense vegetation. They were heading northeast, directly toward the extraction point. Smart. Oduya was not wasting time, but they were not alone. 2 sets of additional prints paralleled their trail. Pursuers staying 50 meters to the south, tracking through the jungle with professional discipline. 2 of the remaining 5 enemies, still hunting even with their commander dead. Ramona increased her pace. The jungle thickened as she descended into the valley. Vines hung from every branch, roots crawled across every surface, and the canopy closed overhead until only scattered fragments of sunlight reached the forest floor. She moved through this green twilight like a shadow, making no sound, leaving no trace. The first pursuer appeared in her scope 300 meters ahead. He was kneeling beside a tree, examining something on the ground, probably a blood trail. Escara's wound would be leaving marks despite their best efforts to contain it. Ramona found a stable position and sighted carefully. The distance was not challenging, but the vegetation created obstacles. Branches and leaves formed a maze between her and the target. She needed a clear lane. She found one, a narrow gap in the foliage, maybe 6 inches wide, that offered a direct line to the kneeling man. It was a difficult shot, the kind of shot that separated good snipers from great ones. Ramona took it. The man dropped without a sound. His companion, 20 meters further ahead, spun toward the noise. He had time to raise his weapon, time to search the jungle for the shooter. Then the second shot took him through the chest. 32 rounds remaining. 3 enemies left. She continued forward, moving faster now. The extraction point was less than 2 kilometers away. If she could catch up with Oduya and Escara, they could make the final push together. The helicopter would be there. They would get out of this jungle alive. The sound of gunfire stopped her cold. 2 bursts, maybe 300 meters ahead. Return fire, scattered and desperate. Then silence. Ramona ran. She abandoned all caution, crashing through the undergrowth with no thought for stealth or concealment. Branches whipped at her face. Vines grabbed at her legs. She did not care. The only thing that mattered was reaching the source of those shots. She burst into a small clearing and found them. Odia was down, propped against a tree with his hand pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. Escara lay beside him, her useless leg twisted beneath her, a pistol clutched in both hands. She was pointing it at the tree line, at the 3 figures emerging from the jungle with weapons raised. The last 3 enemies. They had circled ahead, set up an ambush, and caught Oduya and Escara in the open. Ramona did not hesitate. The first shot took the lead man in the head. The second dropped the fighter on the right before he could find cover. The third dove behind a fallen log, and Ramona put 2 rounds through the rotten wood. He did not get back up. 28 rounds remaining. 0 enemies left. She crossed the clearing in seconds and dropped to her knees beside Oduya. His face was gray, his breathing shallow. The wound in his side was bad. She could see that without looking too closely. "Ghost!" His voice was barely a whisper. "Took you long enough." She pressed her hands against his wound, trying to slow the bleeding. "We need to move. Extraction is less than 2 kilometers." Oduya shook his head weakly. "I'm not going to make it that far. You know that." Ramona felt the cold grip of despair closing around her chest. Not again. She could not watch another person die. Not after Denny. Not after Crane. "You're going to make it," she said fiercely. "I did not kill 20 men just to watch you bleed out in the dirt." Escara crawled to her side. "I can help. My arms still work." Together, they lifted Oduya between them. He groaned but did not cry out. Ramona took most of his weight on her good shoulder, and Escara supported him from the other side despite her ruined leg. They moved like a broken machine, lurching and unsteady, but they moved. The last 2 kilometers were the longest of Ramona's life. Every step was agony. Oduya grew heavier as his strength faded. Escara whimpered with each impact on her wounded leg. Ramona's arm screamed where the bullet had grazed her. But they kept moving. They did not stop. The jungle began to thin. The sound of water reached them, a river flowing somewhere ahead. Then the trees parted, and they stumbled into the clearing beside the river bend. The extraction point. Ramona lowered Oduya to the ground as gently as she could manage. His eyes were closed, his breathing thread-like. But he was still alive, still fighting. She pulled out her emergency beacon and activated it. The signal went out, a pulse of hope in the gathering dusk. Somewhere above the clouds, a helicopter crew was receiving that signal. They were coming. "How long?" Escara asked. Ramona checked her watch. "Extraction window opens in 40 minutes. If they're on schedule, they should be here in less than an hour." Escara nodded and settled beside Oduya, taking his hand in hers. "Then we wait." Ramona took up a defensive position at the edge of the clearing, her rifle trained on the jungle they had just escaped. There were no more enemies. She knew that, but she would not let her guard down. Not until they were in the air. Not until this nightmare was finally over. The sun was setting behind the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere in that jungle, the butcher lay dead. Somewhere in that jungle, Crane lay dead. The price of survival had been paid in blood and grief. But they had survived. Against all odds, against 20 fighters and a legendary killer, they had survived. Ramona listened to the silence and waited for the sound of rotors. The helicopter came in low over the river, rotors beating the water into a frenzy of spray and foam. Ramona watched it descend through the gathering darkness, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. A Black Hawk with a red cross on its side. Medical evacuation. Someone had understood the urgency. The bird touched down at the edge of the clearing, and 2 medics jumped out before the skids had fully settled. They ran toward Oduya with a stretcher between them, their movements quick and practiced. Ramona stepped back and let them work. "He has lost a lot of blood," she said. "Gunshot wound to the abdomen. Maybe 30 minutes ago." The lead medic nodded without looking up. His hands were already moving, cutting away Oduya's shirt, exposing the wound, applying pressure dressings. "We have got him. Get the other one on board." Ramona helped Escara to her feet. The young woman leaned heavily against her as they limped toward the helicopter. The rotor washed toward their clothes, and the noise made conversation impossible. But Escara squeezed Ramona's hand, and that said everything that needed to be said. They climbed into the helicopter and strapped in. Moments later, the medics loaded Oduya onto a stretcher and secured him beside them. His face was the color of old paper, but his chest was still rising and falling. Still fighting. Still refusing to give up. The Black Hawk lifted off, and the jungle fell away beneath them. Ramona watched it shrink through the open door, that green hell that had tried so hard to kill them. The ridge where she had killed Lazarevic. The valley where Crane had made his last stand. The ravines where she had found hope in the darkness. She would never forget this place. It would live in her nightmares for years to come. But she had survived it. They had survived it. The flight to the forward operating base took 40 minutes. Ramona spent the time watching Oduya breathe, counting each rise and fall of his chest like a prayer. The medics worked on him constantly, adjusting 4 lines, monitoring vital signs, doing everything in their power to keep him alive. Escara had fallen asleep against Ramona's shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. When the helicopter landed, a trauma team was waiting. They whisked Oduya away on a gurney, disappearing into the base hospital before Ramona had finished climbing out of the bird. Another team took Escara, more gently but just as quickly, and then Ramona was alone on the tarmac, surrounded by people but utterly isolated. A hand touched her shoulder. She turned to find a colonel she did not recognize, a man with gray hair and tired eyes. "Staff Sergeant Vashti," he said. "I am Colonel Harmon, base commander. I need you to come with me." She followed him across the tarmac and into a building she did not recognize. The fluorescent lights hurt her eyes after so long in the jungle. The air conditioning raised goosebumps on her sweat-soaked skin. Everything felt wrong. Too clean, too bright, too far removed from the world of blood and mud she had just escaped. Harmon led her to a small office and gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. "I have read the preliminary reports," he said. "You killed 14 of the 20 hostiles personally. You eliminated a high-value target, this Lazarevic, who has been on our radar for 2 years. You kept 3 team members alive against impossible odds." Ramona said nothing. The numbers did not mean anything to her. 14 dead men. 3 living ones, barely. Crane, who would never see his family again. The math did not balance. It never would. "You will receive commendations for this," Harmon continued. "Possibly the Silver Star. What you did out there was extraordinary." "I lost 7 people," Ramona said quietly. 7 soldiers who trusted me to keep them safe." Harmon's expression softened. "You did not lose them, Staff Sergeant. The enemy killed them. There is a difference." Ramona wanted to argue, but she was too tired. The adrenaline that had kept her moving for the past 18 hours was fading, leaving behind nothing but exhaustion and grief. "Get some rest," Harmon said. "We will debrief fully in the morning. The hospital is that way if you want to check on your teammates." She found the hospital without difficulty. Oduya was in surgery, a nurse told her. It would be hours before they knew anything. Escara was in recovery, her leg wound cleaned and dressed. She was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Ramona sat in the waiting room and stared at the wall. She thought about Crane, his grudging apology in the caves. She thought about Denny, his hand growing cold in hers on that rooftop in Syria. She thought about all the people she had lost and all the people she had saved. A young soldier appeared in the doorway. He was maybe 22, fresh-faced and nervous. He wore the insignia of a sniper trainee. "Staff Sergeant Vashti," he said. "I am Private Torres. They told me to report to you." Ramona looked at him without comprehension. "Report to me for what?" "I'm your new spotter, ma'am. Assigned as of this morning." She stared at him for a long moment. Her first instinct was to refuse, to send him away, to continue working alone where she could not be responsible for anyone else's death. That was what she had done after Denny. That was what she knew. But something had changed in that jungle. Something had broken, and something new had grown. She thought about Escara squeezing her hand in the helicopter. She thought about Crane sacrificing himself so the others could live. She thought about what it meant to be part of something larger than herself. "Sit down, Torres," she said finally. "Tell me about yourself." The young man's face lit up with relief. He sat in the chair beside her and began to talk, words spilling out in a nervous rush. Ramona listened, really listened, and felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope. It felt like hope. The ghost had learned that even ghosts need someone to watch their back. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stop being alone. If you connected with this story, drop a comment about what moment hit you hardest, or share if you know someone whose quiet strength surprised everyone around them. Outside the hospital window, the sun was rising over the base, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day was beginning. And for Staff Sergeant Ramona Vashti, it felt like a new life was beginning too. She was still Ghost. She would always be Ghost. But now she understood that being invisible did not mean being alone. It just meant that the people who mattered could see her more clearly.